Hello. I want to take us back to 1979. It's the middle of March, and this movie comes out called The China Syndrome. And it played to like moderate box office success, and it was an interesting movie. And then it was about a near meltdown at a nuclear reactor on the California coast. A reactor that actually, I think just recently, this prototype actually just recently was decommissioned. 2 weeks after the movie came out on March 28, 1979, there was a real meltdown at 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor just outside of Hershey, Pennsylvania. Ticket sales for China Syndrome went through the roof. And as a result of, I think actually the movie helped kind of explain what was going on in Pennsylvania. But as a result of the 3 Mile Island accident, which resulted in a serious meltdown, which didn't really get acknowledged until a number of years later, the nuclear industry kind of shut down. And there were no more nuclear reactors built in the United States until just a few years ago. And for many, many years, nuclear was verboten. People started talking about nuclear waste and how long it lived and how long it was a danger, and why we should not be continuing to build nuclear reactors when we don't even have a national repository that safely stores this waste for the 24,000 years it takes to become unradioactive.
How many years?
24,000.
Oh.
And actually, even longer than that. And then, of course, about 7 years later, Chernobyl melted down in an even more catastrophic way in Ukraine. It was that time it was part of the Soviet Union. And that was another reminder of why nuclear power is not the answer for the future, and that nuclear nuclear power is too cheap to meter. I think that's what was the slogan when I was a kid back in the 50s. But something changed in the last 10, 15 years, and actually it was starting to creep in before that. Concerns about greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. In those days it was called global warming. And so looking for alternatives to fossil fuels. And some people, including the famous James Hansen, who was kind of the father of the new climate movement in a lot of people's eyes, was a big proponent of nuclear power as an answer and called it clean energy. And in my opinion, actually really spurred on a lot of misconceptions and a lot of myths about nuclear power. And there were another climate warrior who was also a big nuclear proponent was Al Gore. And I was at a conference actually of environmental journalists back in 2007, and there was a panel about nuclear power, and I got into an argument with somebody at a luncheon after that about why nuclear power was not an answer. And the woman I was talking to was saying, well, James Hansen thinks it's good, and that's supposed to be the answer. I don't know exactly. I actually did a little bit of research on James Hansen a couple days ago just to see, a little bit more about him. And I guess he was really a big nuclear proponent in ways that was very questionable and was called on by a lot of people for actually passing a lot of spurious information. And I'm not sure who funded him, why he was such a big proponent of nuclear power. But now we're seeing a new development. As until a few years ago, there were a lot of projections that energy usage in the United States, and hopefully around the world, was going to reduce because of, well, for one thing, we're going to be getting off of fossil fuels. That was the hope. But also that everything was going to be more efficient. And so we wouldn't need the amount of electricity that we currently need. And in fact, energy use was going down until a couple years ago. And then this thing came along that, well, had been around for a while, but became really popular, called AI. And all of a sudden, there's a need for, I think I've seen 30% increase in electric use in the next 10 years in Oregon. And so one of the answers to where do we get all this power from is people are saying nuclear, because it's clean. So one of the things that we really need to be working on is really to dispel that myth that nuclear energy is clean, to talk about the whole life cycle that starts mostly on indigenous land where the uranium is mined. And it's very devastating for the health and well-being of people who live around the uranium mines. And it's also very carbon intensive, so it's not low greenhouse gas emissions. And then, of course, there's a problem of nuclear reactors, which also leak radiation while they're functioning. Another side issue is that they're really expensive, and they usually take about 2 or 3 times as much time to build as is projected, and they go 2 or 3 times cost overruns or more. So it's not efficient, it's not, it can't be scaled up in the time that we need it. And yet we keep hearing this big pulse, even from people, some people in the legislative realm who are saying we need nuclear power in order to fill out our energy portfolio. So this year, at the this year's legislative session, there are, how many, Lloyd? 13. Like I came here saying 11, and then I found out from Lloyd Marbett that
it's gone up.
Yeah, 13 bills that are promoting different phases of doing, I skipped something very important. Back in 1980, the year after Three Mile Island blew up, or didn't really blow up, but melted down, Oregon passed a ballot measure. We were trying to shut down our one and only nuclear power plant, the Trojan nuclear power plant, which did shut down in '92 after many failed ballot measures. But in 1980, the citizens of Oregon passed a ballot measure which banned any future nuclear construction until there is a permanent national waste repository for nuclear waste. Oh, wow. Which means never. Because that's never going to happen. So now, for the last few sessions, there have been these bills that come up that are trying to rescind that measure that now is 25 years old. No, 45 years old. 45 years old. Yeah. So we got to get very busy in making sure that none of these 13 measures pass. Just to give you an example, they range from repealing Oregon's 1980 ballot measure law and refers it to a vote for the people for approval or rejection in the next regular election, which would be in 2 years, or a year and a half. Then there's one that repeals, it's the same thing, but without a voter referral, just repeal it. And then there's a couple that are really creepy. One of them is to allow just the residents of Umatilla County, where, by the way, Amazon wants to build what they call small modular nuclear reactors, which are not small. They might be modular, and they still have a major waste problem. But Amazon wants to build them so that they can power their, guess what? AI server farms, massive server farms that they are already building in Umatilla County. And that's for another rumble. I think we should talk about what's going on in eastern and central Oregon in terms of farmland, ranch land being turned into not just server farms, but also solar farms, which are maybe not quite as horrible. They make electricity as opposed to using it, but there's still some issues there. So that's for another story. Anyway, the Umatilla County would have the opportunity, if this bill gets passed, to vote on whether or not to allow small modular nuclear reactors to be built in Umatilla County to power Amazon server farms. And this would just be for Umatilla County, but the rest of us wouldn't have any say in it. And that one and another bill which would call for a study by the Oregon Department of Energy on the feasibility of nuclear energy in Oregon. The bill does not identify who actually pays for the study. It requires OSU, wait, am I right? It might not be right.
That's another bill.
Oh, that's a different bill. That one hasn't gone to committee yet. This one is HB 2410. No, it's HB 2036. Directs the Oregon Department of Energy to study, HB 2038. Directs the Oregon Department of Energy to study the advantages of nuclear energy, but not its disadvantages. And they're to submit their findings to the legislature. So both of these are in committee, and you are urged to do everything you can to keep them in committee and not let them out. And there's going to be hearings next week on Thursday, and Lori can give us more information on this bill. But anyway, there's a whole lot of there's a lot of actions you can take, and there's a table back there with Lloyd Marbett and Kathy Chetty, and they will tell you more than I have time to tell you now about how to fight this new resurgence of trying to create Oregon, or turn Oregon into a haven for nuclear power after 45 years of us being an oasis of non-nuclear reality.
Amen.
We'll tell Carly Chin of the Bird Alliance of Oregon. Carly?
Thank you, everybody. I'm Carly Chin. I'm the Advocacy Program Coordinator at Bird Alliance of Oregon. Thanks for having me. I've actually never been to a Rumble before, so I'm just starting off strong, immediately coming to the front and not being an audience member tonight. So I'm going to talk to you today about the Harborton Reliability Project, and I'm curious I feel like this is a very self-selecting crowd, but I'm curious to know who has heard of the Harbison Reliability Project? Who has not heard of this project? Okay, sweet. Well, then I will be useful tonight. So Bird Alliance of Oregon has been following this project for quite a while, and it's been pretty interesting to see how the spin of the need for the project has kind of evolved over time. So just to get right into it, yeah, the Harbison Reliability Project is a proposal from Portland General Electric, or PGE, to update their power grid infrastructure. They cite the need to like upgrade their infrastructure to prevent rolling blackouts by the year 2028, and have known about this need for almost 10 years. So it's been quite a while. It's a multi-phase project, and the first 2 phases are already complete. So phase 1 was the construction of the Harbison substation. This is all taking place on the northernmost stretch of Forest Park, kind of right by Sauvie Island, like the very southern tip of Sauvie Island, that area right there. It's right by by Linton and the Harbison Frog Crossing, if anyone has been involved in those community projects. But anyways, the first phase is already complete, and it was the construction of the Harbison substation, which you can kind of see on like the far left picture map. Phase 2 is underway, and it's the construction of power lines parallel to Highway 30 running north. And then phase 3 is what is being proposed, and this is the part of the project that we are pretty concerned about. So this phase of the proposal would entail developing inside Forest Park to expand their power line infrastructure. So this is in the northern management unit of Forest Park. This is, if you haven't gotten a chance to get out there, it's really mature, diverse, really resilient forest there with a native understory. There's 2 seasonal streams, wetlands. It's really important habitat for red-legged frogs, which are sensitive species in Oregon. And like I mentioned earlier, it's actually right next to the Harbison Frog Crossing, which is where volunteers volunteer to carry the frogs across the highway to get to their breeding ponds, which lies on the other side of the highway. So there's some irony there. So this project would involve cutting down 397 trees. PGE has been very specific with their language. They're saying it's selective tree removal. We're not deforesting. We're not logging anything. So that's kind of their take on that. It would involve cutting down 397 trees, which would really severely impact this this really important forest habitat. Not only decreasing canopy cover, disrupting habitat for these frogs and other types of wildlife, but also making it more susceptible to invasive species moving in. Just a whole host of pretty negative environmental impacts. So Bird Alliance of Oregon, like our official stance, is that we oppose this project it seems like ecological common sense to oppose a project like this. We're really concerned about the environmental impacts to Forest Park. But then we also have a legal basis to oppose this project because of this really unique document that was published actually almost 30 years ago exactly to the day. And I'm talking about the Forest Park Natural Resources Management Plan, which is this really unique document because it's a document that governs how Forest Park is to be managed, but it's not just like a recommendation or, it's not a recommendation, it's actually legally binding, which is a really unique and cool thing that happened back in 1995. And so any development that happens inside Forest Park has to meet the criteria of the Forest Park Natural Resources Management Plan, which I will henceforth be calling the management plan, because that's way too much to say. So any development project that happens inside Forest Park has to meet the criteria of the management plan and align with the goals of the management plan. And if you want to press the next slide, that was a picture of what it looks like inside the forest. So as you can see, we've got like mature western red cedars. We've got a really diverse native understory. You can see sword fern and I think snowberries and trillium. It's just a really beautiful space. A lot of these pictures came from a field trip with actually a couple people who are here today to check out the space. This is what it looks like inside. So it's a really, really, it's an intact, mature forest. It's really special. It's really beautiful in there. And then if you go to the next slide, maybe not, never mind. That's okay. Yeah, so the management plan has 2 conservation goals, and these goals basically say the top priority of the management plan is to manage Forest Park towards growing into an ancient forest. So any development that happens inside Forest Park has to align with this goal. And for very clear reasons, developing transmission lines inside Forest Park, cutting down 397 trees, does not align with this goal, which I think is pretty common sense. So we have kind of 4 main reasons why we oppose this plan. The top one being the fact that it pretty clearly contradicts this top line goal of growing an ancient forest. The second reason that we're really concerned is we do not think PGE's environmental mitigation plan is sufficient. So as required, they did produce a mitigation plan which involves replanting an oak woodland. We're just really concerned that not only would this mitigation plan not be able to combat like the devastation that this would cause in this management unit, it might not. So to clarify, let me backpedal a second. The management plan pretty clearly states that any mitigation has to happen in the same management unit as the destruction. And PGE, part of their plan is to fund other habitat enhancements outside of this area of the park. So that's pretty concerning. We're also concerned that, you know, even if all of the mitigation was happening in the same management unit, PGE is only committed to 5 years of stewardship, and we know that this kind of habitat will take at least 80 years to reach, maturity. And so we're really concerned that their mitigation plan is just simply not sufficient. A third reason that we're opposing this proposal as it stands is because there are alternatives. So, you know, we recognize the need to upgrade power grid infrastructure, and this is a critical component of transitioning to clean energy, but we see in their proposal that there are alternatives that exist outside of Forest Park, and the reason that PGE does not want to follow up with these alternatives is because they would take longer and they would be more expensive. It would involve working with more landowners, and it's very inconvenient for them, but it is possible. And so we really, really would like to see PGE consider these alternatives more fully. And then the last reason that we oppose this proposal is because it sets a really dangerous precedent for future phases of not only PGE's project, but any development in Forest Park. So we already know that PGE has 2 more phases of the Harborton Reliability Project planned, but they've been pretty shady about the details of those phases, so we don't really understand fully what like the full cumulative impacts could be. We do know that there's a potential that, you know, this like a future phase could expand even further into Forest Park, and we're really concerned that building their transmission lines into Forest Park really pigeonholes them into a situation where the only viable way forward for future phases is to continue through Forest Park. And you know, even when we think about other developments, not just PGE, this really sets a very dangerous precedent that it's okay to ignore the management plan, and Forest Park is, you know, not a very valuable and like critical part of our natural ecosystem here in Portland. So kind of to summarize, we recognize there is a need to update power grid infrastructure, and this is a valid need, but we're simply not convinced that this is the right way forward, and this is, you know, sacrificing the resiliency of Forest Park is pretty simply just not something we are willing to support. So it's been a whole process. It was first proposed back in 2022. So to kind of bring you up to speed to where we are now, back in January, there was a public hearing where a hearings officer heard presentations from the city, from PGE, and community members were able to testify. It was fully virtual, but Bird Alliance partnered with the Oregon chapter of the Sierra Club to host a watch party, which was kind of a really nice way to last in a 5-hour meeting, or 5-hour virtual hearing, to be alongside other community members. We were able to witness all the public testimony, and we're really heartened to see a lot of public support. So people testifying against PGE outweighed the number of people supporting PGE about 4 to 1. So it's really great to see that public support. Thank you. And we had over 1,300 comments come in to the hearings officer, which set a city record. So we also had a lot of public support, written public support. As of now, we're waiting to hear a decision, which we expect to hear in early March. At that point, anyone can appeal the decision. So even if the hearings officer approves PGE's project, ours, like Bird Alliance or other advocates, will be prepared to appeal that decision. Conversely, if they reject PGE's proposal, we expect PGE to appeal that decision. So we know this is going to be an ongoing process. We also know that as we speak, PGE is currently in Salem, meeting with legislators, trying to find shopping bill language, basically to amend existing bills that would allow them to circumvent local land use regulations. So this would set themselves up to fully just circumvent local decision makers. So we're keeping an eye on that, and we will share more as we know how that kind of evolves. It's a very current process right now. But yeah, I'm happy to answer questions later. I think I'm running out of time, but thanks for having me.
Thank you, Carly. Now we'll have Kate Murphy from Columbia Riverkeeper. Thanks so much.
Hey everybody, thank you for being here. I just want to acknowledge how incredible it is that this is Rumble number 20. I know I've said this before, but we started out saying we were going to do 3 of these Rumbles, and people just keep showing up. So we keep doing them, and I just want to express gratitude to the planning crew who work so hard with their own time to help put these on. So today we are I'm gonna try and give an overview of what's going on with Zenith Energy. I know this is an issue that many of you are familiar with, and it may be new to some. So I'm gonna go ahead and go into just a little brief background. So you can see kind of an aerial view with the red dot there in the middle, and that's where Zenith is located. And then in the lower corner you can see a more zoomed out version, so you can see it's just before the Willamette River kind of comes into the Columbia River, and it's at a very sensitive spot just next to Forest Park right there. So Zenith Energy is a fossil fuel company based out of Texas who first acquired a facility in Portland at the end of 2017. It was called Arc Logistics. They used to run oil trains, and before that was an asphalt facility. So when they got that facility, they inherited some of the big air permits that had been given to the asphalt facility. And right away the community noticed that they were moving really dangerous products by train through our community. Primarily, we were noticing tar sands oil. So many folks here today have not only been, calling this out since the beginning, but taking the tracks, getting arrested, really like putting themselves on the line to draw attention to this and protect community. And so this has been a long, drawn out adventure that we've all been on. So there's been a lot of back and forth with what's the land use compatibility statement. So a lot of you have heard about the Lux. There's been a number of requests by Zenith for different Luxes on the same property, and right now they have just gotten their 3rd Lux. So it gets kind of confusing as we start talking about this, and I'm going to try not to go too in the weeds and get too complicated, but long story short, they have a Lux is basically a land use approval that the city gives to say whether or not the use is compliant, basically, with the zoning and the comprehensive plan. So A lot of this back and forth has been community driven. Like I said, there's been fights to get the city to deny the land use compatibility statement. At one point the city did do that, and then there was a backroom deal where the city approved a different Lux, and just recently many of you have heard that there was a third Lux that's just been approved, not by city council, but by city administrators, which we'll get into a little bit. Next slide, please. So there's been a number of promises that Zenith has made over the years, starting from the very beginning when they said they weren't gonna, they were gonna put in some new infrastructure for unloading and loading, and they weren't gonna increase their throughput. It's gone up every year since then. They talked about, they're gonna ditch crude oil, not all fossil fuels, to be clear, just crude oil, and switch to renewables, and then we've seen that they've done quite the opposite there. And despite promising to not use any new infrastructure for anything other than exclusively 95% or better renewables, they've not done that. So I think we can see the pattern that we have going on here. So the reality of what is actually happening is a lot different. They're in the process of expanding their operations. They're going to be continuing to ship crude oil until 2027, at which point they'll continue shipping other fossil fuels. And they're going to begin potentially, so there's a lot of confusion right now because of this latest Lux that was just issued. Some of what I'll be referring to is coming from an air permit application and draft air permit that Department of Environmental Quality has pending, and the Lux is an essential piece of that air permit. So they have to have a Lux approved by the city in order for DEQ to consider the air permit. So now, some of this is confusing, right? Because the Lux they had before had a bunch of numbers based on a certain product, and then it's changed. So we're not exactly sure how it's going to play out. But we do know that they're talking about potentially handling something called renewable naphtha, which is, to call it renewable, let's be clear, that just means it doesn't come from petroleum. A lot of renewables are very chemically similar to conventional fuels and share some of the same dangers when it comes to accidents, spills, explosions, emissions, etc. So they're going to also now, according to them, they have a new plan to handle sustainable aviation fuel, and we'll get into that a little bit. But they're also basically just going to bring more harm to communities, not only in Portland, but all along the transportation route. Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about how they're expanding their operations. There's been projected numbers in their application to DEQ that they were going to be moving throughput. It's what we call the quantity of product going through the facility, that they were going to be increasing that nearly 5.5 times what it was in 2019 when they said they weren't going to increase the throughput. And we're talking about, the equivalent of close to 300 trains per year if it were all transported by train. So that's a significant amount of increased train, truck, and marine traffic that is associated with that increase in throughput. So when they talk about switching over to renewable fuels from conventional fuels, what they don't talk about is we're going to move so much more quantity of it that any potential emissions benefits you might have seen will be completely consumed by this massive quantity increase. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of serious potential harms to not only public health and safety, but also the environment. A lot of the products they handle are very dangerous, highly carcinogenic, toxic to humans, toxic to animals and wildlife, and really contribute a lot to harmful things in our environment, like VOCs, which are precursors to ozone or smog. And we know that this area is already fairly overburdened, and we know that a lot of these burdens fall primarily on frontline and already overburdened communities. And so this is a real issue that we're concerned about. And aside from that, there's, we all know this Zenith is located on a liquefaction zone, which means that when there is an earthquake, that will turn to essentially the consistency of like cake batter and could cause a spill into the Willamette and down the Columbia that's potentially just catastrophic in the projections. And so the potential outcomes for continuing to use this space in particular, and a lot of this really old infrastructure is quite dire when you think about what could happen. Next slide, please. So we talked just briefly about renewable fuels, but I want to be really clear that, you know, the industry is really good at their branding and their language, and they get it built into the language of the regulatory system, right? So, but when they talk about renewables, all that means is that the product is not coming from a feedstock that's petroleum based. That does not speak at all to the potential harms that come from these really highly volatile products that share chemical consistencies with these conventional fuels, right? So when we talk about switching to renewables too, they love to tout, you know, in Zenith, they tout the benefits of switching to renewables, and often those benefits are based on the highest blends, right? So maybe you have 95 or even 99% renewable diesel and 5 or 1% conventional diesel. But when it comes to the state and federal standard, what's actually required is only 5% renewable. So you could have a product that's 95% conventional diesel and it's called renewable, and you don't really know whether they're talking about that or they're talking about something that's 99% renewable. So there's a massive difference between those. And again, the breadth of products that are covered under that umbrella of renewables is also contains a lot of dangerous stuff like renewable naphtha, highly volatile, has a risk for flashback events where the vapors can travel low to the ground and flash back to the ignition source. So not something we want at the CEI hub, right? And in terms of when these fuels, these blended fuels spill into water, like the river, what the data is starting to show now that these fuels are being transported and spilling is that when those fuels hit the water, they tend to separate and they require multiple types of cleanup. So some of that fuel might float on the surface and require a boom like we've all seen before, and then some of it might sink into the water column, and that requires a different type of cleanup. And I've said this before to our decision makers, like I challenge anyone to show any point along the entire transportation route where someone's prepared for that type of cleanup. Next slide, please. So I think this resonates with a lot of folks. We've had so much back and forth, and I just want to, again, like, so much gratitude to the community members who just keep showing up through this merry-go-round that we're on with all of our regulatory agencies who continue to pass the buck and say that they are not the ones responsible for protecting us from this harm. And we continue to come back and say, okay, well, we're the ones who are responsible for protecting us, and that's why we're going to keep showing up. And you know, that goes for the 2022 land use compatibility statement. Oh wait, sorry, I got on to the next slide. Okay, so let's talk about the false pretenses of the some of the city approvals that they've gotten, right? So they've got this 2022 land use compatibility statement. One of the promises they made there was any new infrastructure would be used exclusively for renewable fuels, and the definition that they agreed to said renewable fuels are a minimum of 95% renewable. So that was a promise they made, and meanwhile, they were actively using illegally constructed pipelines to handle fossil fuels while they were making that promise. That's the same is true for the Greenway Review, which was an approval to install 3 pipes under Front Avenue. And we'll get into this a little bit more, but many of you know they illegally constructed some pipes under Front Avenue. The first product they put through those pipes was diesel, not renewable fuels. And then there was also, they've alluded to an amendment to the franchise agreement, and that also is something that we are concerned about. Okay, next slide. I'm running out of time, but let me plow through some of these slides because, okay, for anybody who's interested, we've put together a timeline of Zenith's legacy of violations and lies. It's at our website, and it lays out over 20 violations from the time that Zenith's been in Portland, where they've just been out of compliance the entire time, essentially. So please check that out. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go slightly over time. Yeah, okay, sorry. I'm just going to say okay, so Zenith recently, we discovered through a lot of research that Zenith had in fact constructed this pipeline without any approvals over to the McCall dock, which is a facility across Front Avenue, and they started using that dock for marine loading. And it was the result of massive public involvement and pressure in these information sessions that the DEQ held for the public, where eventually the DEQ said, like, we're getting a lot of questions we don't actually have the answers to, so we're going to do a surprise investigation. They went down to Zenith, they finally investigated the dock, found out that the construction was more extensive than they thought. They'd been operating for over 3 years, illegally marine loading on this dock and profiting from it. DEQ did fine them $472,600, which is probably a small percentage of the profit they made off that throughput. And yeah, so anyway, we are now looking at that DEQ sent it back to the city, get another Lux, right? Because their Lux only included their site address. Now they want to have adjacent properties. They want to have 2 more docks. And city administrator just said yes. Okay, next slide. So it's another bait and switch. What's really going on is that after they got caught doing this illegal construction, they're using it as an opportunity to do another big grab, right? So they want more infrastructure. They want to add more property. So they got the 3 adjacent properties, 2 marine loading docks added. They want to add sustainable aviation fuel, which we'll talk about briefly, and then they want to add another use of blending sustainable aviation fuel, which is very concerning. So sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, is something that we're still learning more about, but I will say that Zenith talks about the 100% renewable component. The truth is SAF to be used in aviation has to be blended with a minimum of 50% jet fuel, a fossil fuel. And economically, it's more likely that we'd be seeing a 95% jet fuel blend. And unfortunately, they're using the kind of aviation category as a loophole to kind of get around some of this renewable stuff. Next slide, please. So that new use of blending just brings up a lot of questions. We don't know a lot about it yet. We need to learn more, but certainly there's significant implications for public health and safety and emissions. They need more equipment and infrastructure to do it, and it would require a steady stream of jet fuel. So they'd need to store it somewhere, they'd need pipelines for it, and all of that. Next slide, please. Okay, so what's next? We're going to continue putting pressure on the city to rescind the Lux. We're going to continue supporting City Council has put forward a resolution to investigate Zenith, to investigate the franchise agreement, to look into city staff and make sure that what they were being told was accurate, and hopefully put a pause on any continued approvals. Next slide, please. Okay, here's our take action slide. Everybody, if you have a phone and need to capture that phone number and email of Mayor Wilson, we're asking that everybody call or email the mayor, urging them to stop Zenith's dangerous expansion. And you can always go to our website, ColumbiaRiverkeeper.org, to learn more and stay engaged. And feel free to reach out to me because I sped through a lot of that and I could have talked a lot longer. Thanks for your patience. And last slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Now we're going to have staff attorney from Columbia Riverkeeper, Audrey Leonard.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Is this closer? Okay. Today I'm going to be talking about a company called Next. And this is the epitome of greenwashing on the Columbia. And I have the word renewable there in quotes for a reason. Next slide. So just a little bit about Columbia Riverkeeper's mission to protect and restore the water quality of the Columbia River. And just a quick note that this is a really broad mission. So we acknowledge that part of protecting water quality is protecting climate. And that's a lot of my work as a staff attorney in our climate and energy program area. And for a long time, we called this the Fighting Fossil Fuels program area. And as you can see, we've had to pivot a bit because a lot of these new infrastructure projects that are popping up in the name of renewable fuels maybe aren't technically fossil fuels, but are still harmful, and we still have to engage. So this is taking place in the Columbia River Estuary, which is a very important part of the Columbia River. This is where the salt and fresh water merge and is extremely important to our precious salmon and other creatures that rely on this waterway. I would encourage you to go to the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission's website. They have a lot of really great information about the estuary and why it is so historically important to people who have lived here for so long. Next slide. So this is zoomed in here. The point on the map is Port Westward, and that is a port on the Columbia River. And we're talking a little inward from that, so where you see some of those horizontal waterways. And you can see the elevation around it is a little bit higher on the other side, on the Washington side, and higher as you go into that corner of the screen there. But this area on the map is very low lying. And in fact, it is managed by a series of dikes and irrigation ditches, and so there's a whole diking district that manages and pumps the water in and out depending on the high flooding and time of year. And here's a better picture of where Next will be sited. So it's often maybe represented that Next is going to be in an already industrial area, and as you can see, that's completely false. So that section on the map there you see is farmland. And next to it you have the Columbia Pacific Biorefinery, and you also have a few tanks owned by PGE out there. But for the large part, it is industrial, high value, beautiful farmland. And I would encourage you to take a drive out and witness it yourself. It's stunning. Next slide. Okay, and here's where we get into the greenwashing. The most astounding fact about this is that their air permit will allow them to emit 1 million tons of greenhouse gases per year. And that's the same amount of fracked gas as the city of Eugene uses on a yearly basis. So if you're producing a product and you want to call it renewable and you're relying on fracked gas to produce it, we've got a problem. And so that's the root of why we are primarily interested in this, but it gets worse. You also have to look at the feedstocks that are involved in producing a fuel. In the case of renewable diesel, there are several different feedstocks that you can use. Primarily, they are made out of purpose-grown feedstocks like corn and soybean oil. So these are crops that are grown typically in the Midwest, and there's a lot of carbon that goes into that process. So you're harvesting the crops, you're refining them into an oil, you're shipping them by train all the way out here to then be put through this process that is powered by frack gas. So none of that is sustainable. There are some lower carbon intensity feedstocks, such as used cooking oil and some like fish grease type products, but because other states like California have been quicker to the process of implementing regulations that require those lower carbon feedstocks, the markets are pretty much spoken for when it comes to the good ones. So a company like Next coming in and saying that they're gonna make all of this product with fish grease is fishy. So you really have to look at, are they showing contracts? What are they submitting to, say, the SEC on official filings and things like that? And when you dig into it, the numbers really do show that they will be relying on corn and soybean oil for the majority of their product. And then you have to look at end use, right? So renewable diesel does burn slightly cleaner, but we still need to look at the life cycle emissions and the pollution that's happening in the local area in order to create those. And you also have to look at where the product is being used. So the whole reason Next wants to be on the Columbia River is access to this port so that they can ship their product down to California and other parts of the world. If they were truly planning to sell their product in Oregon, they would be trying to site themselves somewhere else. Yeah, next slide. And just to break from all of that despair, I do want to take a second and highlight the existing vibrant agricultural community out at Port Westward and near Clatskanie. So these shots are from the Clatskanie Food Hub, which is a local shop that's set up that sells all local food and goods, and it is so wonderful and beautiful. So for this Houston-based company to come in and say that they're going to save Clatskanie or they're going to save this downtrodden community is completely false and is disrespectful. So it's all about investing in what they already have going. It is some of the most high-value farmland in Oregon. Next. And it's also across the street from the Great Vow Buddhist Monastery. It is a immensely significant spiritual place. I've had the benefit of going myself, visiting, and it is so peaceful. They have silent retreats, and the peace out there that you access is so important to what they're doing. And next flare stack, if it's built, would be essentially at eye level with this, with the monastery. So if somebody were to basically propose building a refinery across from Mount Angel, that would be about the equivalent. Of course, to build a refinery, you have to get through a lot of permits. So here's a list. I won't, well, maybe I have time to get into most of them. But these are some of the permits that Next has had to obtain and that we have fought at every single level. So the first one is from the Department of State Lands, and because Next is building their project on a wetland, they have to basically get permission to fill 100+ acres of wetlands, and in order to do that, they filed a plan for mitigation. And this mitigation includes building 400+ acres of additional wetlands, which on paper might sound okay, but when you look at the reality of it, these man-made wetlands do not function the same as natural wetlands. And you have the added complication of where this is sited. Because all of that land is so delicately managed in the irrigation district, there's a lot of concern that adding more swamp to an already very swampy place and adding a bunch of concrete in another location, the water tables are not going to be able to handle that. So lots of issues with their mitigation plan, and unfortunately that moved through, but they're all connected, so each of these permits rely on each other, so we're hoping that there are ways to bring this in as like a factual issue with other permits in the future. I already kind of covered their air permit. They obtained it super early back in 2022. And their county land use permits, they unfortunately do have. We were able to fight their first one and get it reversed, but then they refinagled their plans and got it through. And they also need a Clean Water Act Section 401 water quality certificate from the state. DEQ unfortunately issued that permit in January of this year. Yes. And they did that even though so many people spoke up. We had locals come to the hearings and so many public comments. Columbia Riverkeeper, along with the Northwest Environmental Defense Center, submitted 40-page comments on this permit process, and DEQ didn't even bat an eye. The Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission has also opposed this project. They filed comments on this permit as well. Again, DEQ ignored them. And I guess not to be too pessimistic about that, because it was issued so recently, we are in the works of filing the administrative appeal. So that is basically going back to DEQ and saying, here are all the problems with the permit you issued and why it's legally insufficient. They also have a few stormwater permits left from DEQ to obtain, and they have to go through a major federal process that includes an environmental impact statement and getting another permit from the Army Corps. That is currently slated to happen this year, with a draft environmental impact statement coming out in mid-2025. And the last one on here is a permit that we believe they should be required to obtain, but that the Army Corps has said that they do not. So we are in the middle of litigation with the Army Corps over that permit. It's essentially saying that in order to drive their heavy construction vehicles over a road that is situated on top of one of these levees, that they need permission from the Army Corps, and it's the Army Corps' duty to prove that those construction trucks aren't going to degrade the levee and cause problems for everyone living in the district. So this is Warren Seeley. He's a 4th-generation mint farmer out at Westward. He has spoken at many public hearings, has submitted evidence about the status of these dikes and all of the issues with the flooding in the area. He is intimately familiar with the land, obviously as a farmer, and the flooding of this area. Like, you could not pick a worse place to site a refinery. Similar to Zenith, this area is a liquefaction zone. So storing barrels of fuel and feedstocks in an area that will just turn to cake batter when the big one hits, and right next to the Columbia River is a disaster waiting to happen. And unfortunately, the local and state regulators are just buying this idea of economic prosperity from the company. So you see that from the Port of Columbia County. When we won our first land use challenge, and the company decided to reconfigure their plans, the port actually removed Warren Seeley from some land he had been leasing from the port to make room for the refinery. So you're seeing this just absolute trust in a company over an individual and, you know, the livelihoods of people who live out here. And just a few months after that happened, Next announced that they would not be paying full rent to the Port of Columbia County while this project was underway. They decided that they were going to go from paying, I think, $115,000 a month to about $15,000 a month. So wouldn't it be nice if you could just ask your landlord for that kind of reduction? And I think it just shows like they're not going to fulfill their promises. A little bit more information on the water quality permit. I won't get into all of this, but it's just riddled with inconsistencies and issues that DEQ did not do their due diligence to look into. We will be bringing all of this in our petition for reconsideration to DEQ. So as soon as we file that, we will be sending out more information about it and more information to you all about how you can weigh in with DEQ and encourage them to actually go back and look at this and give it the time it deserves. So yeah, that next step is the petition for reconsideration, and then staying tuned as well for the draft environmental impact statement. That environmental impact statement should cover all of the impacts of this facility. We know the Army Corps is going to do a horrible job, and so it's going to be our job to basically tell them how to write this and what to consider, including all of the environmental impacts that come from the feedstocks that Next wants to make this product out of. That's all I've got.
I've heard a lot of information. Raise your hand if you feel a little bit overwhelmed. I can't keep it in my head. Fortunately, there is a Bird Alliance of Oregon website, Columbia Riverkeeper, and Barbara Bernstein on Locus Focus every Monday morning on KBOO radio. And we have this list. If we want to just go through the panel, and they can just say call to action. And at this time, we'll also be collecting any questions you have for our Q&A. So Barbara, you want to say anything you want about call to action?
First, you should go to Lloyd and Kathy's table over there, and they will give you more information about the hearings. Yeah. A week from today, there will be hearings in Salem about 2 of these strange nuclear bills that are in committee. So go to Salem if you can, testify. I think probably you can also do written testimony, and you can get more information from Kathy and Lloyd. Thank you, Kathy and Lloyd, for being here.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah, Bird Alliance has a lot of information on our website. We also do have a table in the back with some great volunteers with QR codes to scan to get you signed up for our action alerts. This is the best way to stay up to date with all the information. You can also manually sign up for action alerts, and these are emails that will keep you updated on next steps, upcoming issues, things like that. I'll just flag this now. We also are planning a lobby day on April 8th. So if PGE's little shenanigans do go through, we will definitely be speaking to that. And you can find more information soon on our website.
I just need to interrupt. There has been a phone found, and some people have had to leave. So if you have your phone here, make sure it's here and retrieve it.
I found this in the lobby out there. So people are beginning to leave, so I wanted to mention it before people wandered up.
Thank you.
Anybody want it?
Check for your phones, folks, if you're missing a phone.
There's no name on it, so I can't read anything.
We'll sort it out. Okay, call to action for Zenith. Like we talked about, contact Mayor Wilson, call, email, continue supporting the City Council's resolution to investigate Zenith, continue putting pressure. It's so often in these long, years-long fights where we have these moments where something gets approved and we feel terrible about it. And that is part of the journey to victory. And so I just hope that folks look at it that way. We're going to keep going. And also, if anyone's interested in giving testimony about renewable fuels, there's going to be an opportunity on February 27th. The Committee for Climate and Energy is having their meeting, and there'll be an opportunity that day for public testimony. And there's going to be a panel of folks, which I think, yeah, Audrey and I might be on. So come check it out.
Also, wait, also City Council is probably going to do resolution about.
Yes, and is that on the agenda for May 5th?
Well,
It's
March 5th, I mean.
March 19th.
They got pushed. Okay, so we're showing up at all the City Council meetings in red, just to make sure they don't forget about us. But the resolution that's been proposed by Councilors Green and Murillo, and now has two others. Yeah, that is going to be on the agenda for March 19th.
Great, and the action item for Port Westward is to stay tuned. You can sign up for action alerts at our website. And then additionally, I listened to there was a hearing on a renewable diesel bill in the Oregon legislature this morning. I listened to that. It's HB 3261. And that is up for, you can submit written testimony through tomorrow. And none other than the CEO of Next, Houston-based Chris Eford, showed up and was trying to get the committee to bite on this bill. It's not particularly damaging. It's just a bill to study and like look at how to incentivize renewable diesel production in the state. But of course, you had industry players basically up there whining about how long the permitting processes take and how we need to clear those hurdles for more refineries in the state if we're going to have enough renewable diesel. So something to keep an eye on, and if you can send them a quick note, that would be excellent.
And one more, actually. February 28th is going to be a National Day of Resistance, and don't buy from Amazon or anybody else. And so I want to tie this in, because I didn't really get into this very much in my presentation. Jeff Bezos is behind actually, the small modular nukes that Umatilla County is playing with building would be for Amazon. But Jeff Bezos is always also working on trying to get a small modular nuclear reactor built at Hanford Nuclear Reservation, which is a horrible, horrible idea. And so I think that we should really be focusing on boycotting Amazon and also looking more into this whole shenanigans about AI. I mean, I think that that's something that really to keep your eye on, about how it's hyped, it's causing this frenzy to build more power generation. And in fact, it's really taking us totally in the wrong direction. So the first question I think we should all be asking is, do we really need AI?
It's not entirely.
So before we have our Q&A, Charlie, our videographer, has an announcement.
Yes, one more event that you all might be interested in, which is a fun event happening this Saturday, is in the intersectionality between plastic pollution and consumerism and houselessness in Portland. Ooh. So our organization Recycled Living is building a home for someone to live in who's living unhoused in a partnership with another organization, and we're having community build days where people can come and help construct this home. We've had one already and it was a lot of fun. The way we bring our foot in the environmental advocacy background, which is my background, is that we're taking industrial waste plastics from large corporations and recycling them into building materials to sheathe the exterior of these homes. Cool. So if anyone's passionate about those two issues and wants to have a fun event with a community lunch and a cool opportunity to meet people, this Saturday at Cultivate Initiatives, our partner nonprofit, at 11 a.m. we have this event. So cultivate initiatives at 11 a.m. or go on the recycledliving.org website or see me after.
What's the address?
Cultivate initiatives.
They have no address?
They're on 146th and Stark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. We have one other quick one.
This is super quick. It's right here at St. Luke on Sunday, March the 16th. We are going to be a hub for the Interfaith Earth Summit. And so if you would like to come back to the same space that you're familiar with now, we would love to have you here. And what we are going to review from the workshop standpoint here is about community resilience. And so that we can all work together in community to know who has what kinds of assets that we can use in the event of an emergency. So that's what's going on here on March 16th in the afternoon. It's a Sunday afternoon.
Thank you.
Yeah, this picture's on the, that poster's on the door, and you can take a picture of it. Thank you. Before we start the Q&A, I just want to say we're working on 3 rumbles at a time. And could the rumble team please raise their hand or stand up or jump or something? Two of the panelists are rumblers, by the way. Barbara and Kate. So we have 2 more rumbles that we know of, and then we'll have one in April and May and June. No, but the one coming up in March, actually in February, the last day of this month, February 28th, and doing 2 rumbles in a month, will be in Eugene on the U of O campus during the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference, otherwise known as PILC. And if you haven't been there, it's quite an environmentalistic extravaganza. It's free. You could go down for a day, but if you know somebody that you can stay with, I really recommend Friday or Saturday. Those are the best days. It is also open on Sunday, but it gets a little sleepy that day. And but we're going to be there on Friday from 1:30 to 3 with a whole new panel, pretty whole new, and we'll be in the Law Building, room 184, and I believe that's on your program. Speaking of your program, that thing's a valuable document. Not only does it have the bios of this amazing panel, it has quotes from them, so you can remember that sort of condensed version, since there was a lot of information, and also a list of elected officials that you can contact. You may be moved to contact an official or 2 after tonight's program, and a list of our 40+ co-sponsors who we absolutely love. And then after that, on March 20th, 1 month from today, at Havurah Shalom, sponsored by the Havurah Climate Action Team, some of their representatives are here, we'll be hosting a Rumble number 22, and that will be March 20th, same time as this one. That will be at 825 Northwest 18th. Hope to see you there. And you can raise your hand and say, I've been to a Rumble. Okay, so we have questions now. What do the tribes have to say about the most recent Lux decisions? And if you have any questions, you can bring them up during this time. I think that's yours, Kate.
Yeah, thank you for raising that question. I personally haven't talked to Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission since the decision's been made, but they were involved in the process to try and convince the city not to approve the Lux. And if anyone wants to listen, the executive director from CRITFIC was on a panel in the work session for city council. I think it was January 21st. Yeah, January 21st, thank you. The recording of that is there, and they gave very powerful testimony as to why this would have a significantly negative impact on tribal resources. And, you know, some of the counselors acknowledged that even hearing from them on that panel was not a replacement for tribal consultation. And so that's a great question. It's a great question for the city to ask why they would proceed without proper tribal consultation.
Yeah.
This one's for Audrey. How do we protest, and this is double underlined, how do we protest DEQ's negligence as support for your legal work?
Woo.
Yeah, so DEQ's governing body, the Environmental Quality Commission, EQC, lots of acronyms, alphabet soup. But the EQC meets, I think, every other month, and each of those meetings, they have an opportunity for public comment on anything you want to talk to them about. So if you want to show up and tell DEQ's boss that DEQ is messing up, we've been keeping up that message, and they need to keep hearing it because they made the mistake.
Big one.
Thank you. Carly, are there alternative projects, locations PGE could use for their infrastructure upgrades? Or are all their eggs in the Forest Park basket?
It's a great question, and no, there are actually 2 alternatives outside the park. Back in 2022, PGE commissioned an alternatives analysis that found 2 alternatives that route basically outside the park and wouldn't impact Forest Park pretty much at all. Forest Park, or PGE, has tried to discredit these alternatives as like impossible because they have severe impediments, but after looking at the alternatives report, all of the impediments are PGE's own criteria. So they've created their own roadblocks, and these impediments include the need to like re-site an existing PGE line that they own, so they could do that. It would just take more investigation, and so a lot of their, actually all of their, the impediments are actually self-created, which is something that we have pointed out.
Yeah. Thank you. Barbara, please tell us about the water use / waste with the small nukes, small modular nuke reactors.
Water waste.
That might be a question for somebody at the back table.
Yeah. I will actually, but I will say one thing. There's the water waste issue about the server farms. I think that in the Dalles, which now has, I think, 4 Google server farms, that I think it uses 30 to 40% of all the water in the Dalles, and also a huge amount of their electricity. So that part I'm aware of. So guys in the back, what's the water waste for small nukes?
Well, really, when you think about this, you're marrying 2 great environmental impacts. The data centers, they have water. They need water to cool those computers that are providing you the cloud that you get to store your information in. And of course the AI that they want to cover the world with, apparently. And then you have the small modular nuclear reactors. And depending on the reactor design, they use water to cool the reactors themselves. Yeah. So it's a combination now. It's the 2 of the worst together. And I really do hope you'll come visit here, because keep in mind, for 45 years, the people, some of who are not alive anymore, who brought us the ballot measure that has prevented nuclear plants from being built in Oregon. And if those nuclear plants don't get built in Oregon, the data centers are going to have a problem, aren't they? Yeah. They're not going to be able to use those small modular nuclear reactors. And a week, we have a week. There's a hearing coming up. You can make a tremendous difference just by calling the legislators. And we've got a flyer here that's got all of them on the back with their pictures, so you know what they're talking about. And you can call them, and you can let them know of your concerns about this. And it makes a difference. It makes a tremendous difference. So please come visit me.
Visit a man that does not need a microphone.
When I was in 5th grade, my teacher sent a note home to my mother saying, "I think your son has a 3rd lung."
Thank goodness for that 3rd lung. This is a question for all. For the particular issue you brought up, what argument, if any, would help sway relevant decision makers, assuming money is on the other side? That is, where are they weak?
Ooh.
So we have put all of these things in front of the regulatory agencies, but the one that I think they are paying the least attention to, which is perhaps the most shocking, is the levee infrastructure around where Next would be sited is already facing problems. So, like I said, driving that construction equipment over the levees, and it also puts a lot of these local farmers and homes at risk. So if something were to happen inside those dikes, they will not prevent the pollution from moving throughout that entire area and getting to the Columbia River. So I think the seismic stability of the levee infrastructure is a big one, and just like the seismic issues of the site in general.
So for Zenith, I would say that there's a number of issues that I would hope were decision makers to really learn about it, that it would sway them to not continue approving Zenith. But I will say this, I think oftentimes we don't know exactly which point of pressure is going to make the difference, because in the end the people making these decisions are just people, right? And different things get through to different people. And so I would encourage everyone to continue putting pressure on all the points, and at some point we just might see that one of those gives. And I think that the cumulative pressure that we can apply is also really critical. And you know, sometimes when we win, we really actually never find out exactly what it was that like turned the tide. So I would say, if you want, in terms of Zenith, if you want to get really involved in talking points, we often will share a document with community ahead of time with talking points that they can then choose to address and dig into in meetings with regulators. So keep checking in. There'll be processes with the city and with DEQ coming up with the pending air permit decision.
Well, a couple things. First of all, with nukes, the problems that were the reason why Oregon voters in 1980 voted to ban any future nuclear facilities until there was a permanent waste repository, that problem is still there. So I think we need to remind our legislatures as they survey these strange 13, whatever, bills that are before them about basically overturning the 1980 ballot measure, is that we have the same problem we had in 1980, that we had in 1950, that we had in 1945. And that until that's solved, and remind them it's not going to be solved. I mean, the best thing we can do is to stop making nuclear waste. So that's the first thing. I think water is another issue to bring up, and I think what Lloyd said is really good. And I think tying it into the question, do we really need this power? Who's benefiting?
Yeah.
Do we need to support Jeff Bezos?
Yeah.
Or do we need to support the communities in Central and Eastern Oregon that are ranching communities, farming communities, that do not need to have all these server farms, basically displacing farms?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the angle we take definitely does depend on the decision maker. So for the last round, it was a hearings officer who was solely considering whether or not PGE's proposal met specific criteria. So it's very technical. So the advice that we offered our advocates were to stay very technical, stay very specific, and like very specifically reference the Forest Park Natural Resources Management Plan. For this next round of decision making, it will be City Council, and so for that angle, I think we'll be saying it's still important to be specific and reference criteria, but since this round of decision makers have constituents that they're answering to, then I think having your more personal, emotional stake in the matter is more impactful, whereas before the hearings officer really wasn't considering any like personal stories or emotion or thing like that. It was purely technical. I think this next round will have space for more of kind of the emotional story part.
Okay, for our last question. Now this one was directed for Kate, but I'm going to open it up for everyone on the panel. What didn't you get to say that you want to add?
That's from your timekeeper.
Careful what you ask for. I think what I would really want to drive home is to reiterate that Zenith is a fossil fuel company. They will continue to be a fossil fuel company. They are thick with the greenwashing and getting fat off of it. But we need to continue calling it out, because that is what they specialize in, and we need to recognize that also the tactics they use are the same that we've seen before. You know, this sustainable aviation fuel is renewable naphtha, is fracked, you know, natural gas, LNG. We've seen this, what they do. They find waste products to capitalize and make them profitable. And so continuing to be vigilant and calling that out, not referring to them as a renewables company, not referring to, you know, being very specific when we use that language, and not falling into any of the greenwashing tactics would be something. And also have hope. I know we talked about like a lot of really heavy stuff tonight, and I know that it's a lot to feel like, how are we ever going to do anything? But this is, like I said before, this is really what it looks like on the journey to victory, believe it or not. And we don't always win, but when we do win, it often looks like this along the way. So hang in there, keep showing up, and thank you all.
Woo-hoo. Actually, I'm going to say we often do win, especially with, I mean, we've been winning a lot.
Yeah.
And we have to keep remembering that. There's these setbacks. I mean, think about Jordan Cove, which took 17 years, but we won. And so far, there's not another plan to build an LNG terminal at Jordan Cove. There's a few other issues like offshore wind. I actually, the thing that, I mean, what I really kind of wanted to talk about tonight, but I don't know anything about it, and it wasn't the topic, but I'm really concerned about AI and about this push for this energy that, I mean, I've been calling it, well, kind of talking about the nuclear and AI connection, nukes for needless energy. But that we don't need this energy, and we really have to start thinking about how much energy we don't need. And so that also, I had kind of an argument with my state rep, Mark Gamba, about a year ago about all the solar farms that are being built in eastern Oregon, and he was saying we need the power, and so environmentalists complain because it's going to kill the sage-grouse, but the sage-grouse is going to die anyway because it's all going to go up in flames because of, you know, climate change. And I feel like, I mean, I would like to sort of sit Mark down and kind of start from the beginning and sort of see about, you know, unwinding some of that. So I feel like there's a lot of people that are believing that we need this energy, and so somehow it kind of takes me back to the 70s. When we had this thing called appropriate technology we were all learning about, and really learning to like live off the grid and whatever. And I think that we need to go back to thinking about what we really need. That's why I'm really excited about February 28th, because it's a time to really think about what do we need, what do we not need, and how do we, and who's getting us to want. And that's the thing, my biggest thing about Jeff Bezos is his genius is how to get people to want things they don't even know they want. And then you become dependent on that want. So we need to really fight that, and I think if we can overcome that, we can overcome a lot of the other challenges that we're facing.
Anybody else have a... Okay, we have that musical treat coming right up. Before that happens, I just want to say, when we're all done with the mic stuff, if you want to help in any way cleaning up, it's mostly just chairs. We have these black chairs with the, I mean, blue seats, black metal. Those get stacked in stacks of 6, and they go over by the window. The plastic chairs get stacked and go over by those plastic curtains. And then there's these silver rounded back chairs. They go right here. But don't feel like you have to, but if you can. Okay, and we have an announcement or two. Okay, well,
I'd be happy to.
You got an announcement? Okay. And then we'll have Michael. And then we'll have our musical treat.
Thank you. I was just standing because my back hurt. But I'm happy to take advantage of this. So, amongst all the other wonderful opportunities you have to get active, another one is around the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub. So there are 2 things coming up. One is right here, maybe in your lap. So if you got one of these beautiful postcards, or if you haven't gotten to see one of these lovely old postcards, we have a table over here. All we need for you to do is either sign your name or write a short message on it. It will go to county commissioners to ask them to pass the risk bond ordinance to hold the facilities financially responsible for any problems they may cause. The other is, we have this wonderful day next Thursday. Like, there's no end of things you can do, from the nuclear hearings down in Salem, and then if you want to after lunch, at 1 o'clock, the Emergency Management Committee is going to have hearings on 4 bills related to the CEI hub. If you want to take a trip to Salem, please do so. If you can't take a trip to Salem, watch it online so they know people are concerned that there's public interest. Pick up one of these. Thanks so much for giving me that opportunity. First time my bad back did anything good for me.
Thank you. My name is Michael Mintz. I'm here with the Portland Immigrants' Rights Coalition, and we're doing some tabling in the back. And we've had some great success just handing out these flyers, Know Your Rights. And people are starting to get picked off the streets and in our neighborhoods. And as you all know, it's happening all around the country, and it's starting to happen here now too. So if I would encourage any of you to grab a few flyers in the back. We have them in English and Spanish, and these are Know Your Rights, and also the red cards that inform people of their rights. And if everybody here took just a few flyers and handed them out, you know, I've been going to little taco stands and Mexican restaurants and just going, you know, is this, you know, and I started out feeling weird, kind of funny about it, and just go, you know, is this something that would be helpful to you or anybody that and the response has been amazing. Like, people have been so grateful. So grab a few flyers on your way out and distribute them if you're so moved. Thank you. And now, without further ado.
Thank you, Michael, for introducing. Michael, one more thing. I took a cue from you when you told me you were going, when you were in any of the restaurants, and people work in your neighborhood, you know, doing lawns and stuff. So some people were working next door, and I took one of the flyers over there, and I told you about.
Oh yeah, yeah. People that are doing yard work.
They're in your neighborhood, and
sure.
They were very happy, just like you had
right.
to me. They went, oh yeah, and it was so it's in your neighborhood. You don't have to go too far to find somebody to just go up and say, would any of your friends, would any of your friends be interested in this?
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, all these folks that are working around us and, you know, do all the things that keep our community going. So thank you very much. Thank you, Susan. And the Raging Grannies.
Yeah! So all of us heard a lot of bad news. We're here to rally you up, cheer you up, get you enthused to move, because it's not all bad, okay?
Let's banish Zenith, the brand we would like to forget. Let's banish Zenith, they pose our rivers a threat. Take down their tank parks, stop all the trains in their tracks. Now's the time to banish Zenith, no renewed contracts. Let's banish Zenith, their deals are shady at best. Let's banish Zenith, put secret meetings to rest. No more illegal transport of fuel through our town. Now's the time to banish Zenith, take the tank parks down.
Thank you. And this one is just an ode to the rivers. This is from that good old Woody Guthrie song, which poor old Woody thought the dams were so great. If he was around now, he wouldn't feel the same way, so we rewrote his song.
Are you going to start with the chorus? Okay.
Zenith thinks they have a loophole to sell. Instead of petroleum, biodiesel. But if there's a spill, then we must bid farewell. So long, O river, so long. So long, Columbia, so long. So long, Willamette, so long. If we don't protect them, they cannot live on. Yeah. And that's why we're singing this song. Zenith's investments do not merit thanks. There's tank parks and fuel trains beside river banks. And when there's an earthquake that ruptures the tanks, so long, O river, so long.
Now you can sing.
So long, Columbia, so long. So long, Willamette, so long. If we don't protect them, they cannot live on. And that's why we're singing this song. Look at Swan Island, you'll see such a sight. So many years of pollution and blight, making our river a super fun sight. So long, O river, so long. So long, Columbia, so long. So long, Willamette, so long. If we won't protect them, they cannot live on. And that's why we're singing this song. Rivers are not just a watery way to transport our cargo and make business pay. They're life-giving forces, so we will not say, so long, O river, so long. So long, Columbia, so long. So long, Willamette, so long. If we won't protect them, they cannot grow on. And that's why we're singing this song.
There you go.